Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label. Today's episode is sponsored by Blue Apron. I'm kidding. Can you imagine if we had to do that every time? But guess what? Here's some good news. We just launched a Patreon, so we wouldn't have to do that. So we don't have to, do the Squarespace thing or the MeUndies or what are the other ones? The HelloFresh. Can you imagine that? That would just feel so weird. But how exciting is it? And first of all, thank you to all of our patrons who've gone to patreon.com/other record labels and have supported the podcast. It's so exciting. I'm so grateful. So please think about doing that. And at the end of this episode, we have some bonus content that is exclusive for our patrons. And that's going to happen every single week where we do something special with the guest. And that's just an exclusive extended interview, as well as a ton of other perks that you can find out at patreon.com/other record labels. We also have a place on our website too, otherrecordlabels.com/Patreon. So just the opposite. But anyhow, at the end of this interview, which by the way, I'm excited for you to hear this. There's some real eye-opening stuff as we chat with Josh from Refresh Records. I know a lot of people in our community know this label and love this label. And so I'm excited for you to hear it. At the end of the episode, we and this is new for our patrons, we're starting, as well as asking a couple extra questions, we're going to play a game with our guests. And this has gone so well. We're having so much fun. Do you remember the Now That's What I Call Music compilations? I mean, they're still in existence today. In fact, there's 110 of them. And so the game is that I pick a song and I tell the guest the name of the song and the artist, and they have to tell me what number now compilation that came off of. And so they basically are guessing between 1 and I think about 109 or 110. And this has been going so well, and it's exciting because if they guess correctly, which I don't think they ever will, but if they guess correctly, then other record labels will donate $100 to their charity of choice. And so it's gone really well. And I'll tell you, the couple times that I've played it leading up to this so far with our guests and pre-recorded guests, people have come remarkably close, too close for my comfort. So stick around at the end of the episode, or you have to join our Patreon in order to hear it. It's not at the end of this episode. It's in the exclusive feed just for our patrons. So go to patreon.com/other record labels. Thank you for being a listener and enjoy this. When we were talking about finances, this just popped in my head when I was kind of going through your label and doing some research. I remember we were talking about finances recently in our Facebook group, and you mentioned that you put 100% back into the label, and that's probably amounted to quite a lot over the years. And sorry if this wasn't supposed to be public knowledge, but I think that's really cool. Like, what's your thought process on that?
Yeah, so, all right, so this label started as a passion project for me. It's always been like the side business. I do still work full time, and that covers my needs and my, finances and all that stuff. So the label was always supposed to be just about supporting the music I love and everything. And so it was a big part of, I'd rather grow the label and do more and like be able to contribute back to more artists and everything over time. So every dime we do make goes back into, new releases. And obviously we split profits down the middle with all of our artists and everything. But
cool.
We personally, I've never taken a dime from the record label. And I just, every now and again, we might put a little bit more in, but it's been pretty self-sustaining for a couple of years now. And it is just about growing. Like, we recently got to bring on some people to work with. We have like a marketing person and an art person now. And
that's amazing.
If we're going to pay out of pocket to people within the label, then I'd rather it be supporting, jobs and giving people like more avenues for their creativity that are into the music business side of things versus, taking money back to cover my own expenses. I'm sure eventually at some point I'll at least reimburse myself for everything I've put in, but
sure. Yeah,
that'll be many years down the line.
Yeah. I love that. That is actually a huge dream of mine is not just the sustainability of artists. That's important, but I really have a heart too for like the industry people who are looking for work and who it's sad to see them in jobs where they're not fully using if they're great writers or if they're great artists or filmmakers. So I just love when a label, I mean, even as a DIY artist or as a label, when I'm hiring a photographer or a mastering engineer or a talented writer to work on something, I just feel that feels really good.
Yeah, 100%. That's been extremely important to me since day one. I mean, even with our first few record releases, we made sure that we worked with local artists to work on the cover art, and we always feature the artists that do the designs and stuff on our website and link out to their sites. And it is a key thing. Like we've set up at a comic book convention here in town
Cool.
for a few years, and it's a weird place because a lot of people walking by are like, why is a small record label here? And what the hell? Why are people still pressing vinyl? But we do it because it is about promoting the artwork as well. And we would have some of our friends, like one year we made posters by a local artist and, screen printed them and sold them there and featured them and whatnot. And just keeping a focus on, music as an art versus music as just, music.
Yeah.
It is a whole creative medium, and there is a whole lot more to it. And so supporting that in every way possible is important to me.
You just tapped on something that I have been passionate about. I haven't really figured out a solution to yet, but all of us record labels and independent musicians are trying to sell records in the same places, record stores or at a music venue or more likely on Twitter and Instagram. And people are, and Spotify, and people are inundated with millions, if not billions of options, whereas at a comic book festival or whatever, all of a sudden now you're potentially the only record label, and I've always thought, if your music would fit well in a little country gift shop or at a truck stop, or it's something where there aren't other music, then that's I feel like people need to go off after that more. I think that's a great idea.
Absolutely. I mean, here in Charlotte, so one of our friends runs a barcade. It's temporarily closed right now, but
sure.
He's just relocating. But for the first few years, he would do like a yearly concert just to promote the barcade and kind of have like a cookout and whatnot. And he would always invite, local merchants to come out, and there'd be artists selling their stuff and small bakeries and all that. And he always had us setting up a booth to sell records. And I mean, in that scenario, there is music, but it isn't about the music. It's about coming out to support a barcade that everybody loves. It's a great community spot. And honestly, that's like more than any concert we've thrown or any other event we've ever been to. Like those events, when we would sit down there, we would connect with more people and sell more records and sell more t-shirts, especially t-shirts, honestly.
Sure.
And just get more ingrained with people in the community and connect with people, and then end up, they would add us on social media and be like, hey, I was the person who was chatting with you the other day. And it is going into those areas that aren't typical for music has definitely been way more rewarding, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising for everyone. It's surprising for the customers and the patrons to walk by and go, "Oh, this is something different." It isn't just a normal booth that you would see at a festival or something. And
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I think that's genius, and I think that labels need to be thinking about. They know their audience. They know what types of products and interests that their audience has, or at least they should know, and to think about where else are those people. I mean, obviously we know where they are when it comes to Reddit or insert on a YouTube channel, but where in the community are they? Is it an indoor skate park? Is it a coffee shop?
Yeah,
man, that's very interesting. Good for you.
Oh, thanks.
What is your strategy behind the label? Do you have a unique way of approaching how you run things? I mean, I know a lot of us think about our businesses in the middle of the night when we're falling asleep, and a lot of us are like, we see the uniqueness, but we try to communicate that to other people. But do you have a way of approaching your label?
It's hard to say unique just because there are so many labels doing the same things. I mean, as I mentioned already, it started as a passion project, so it was just kind of supporting bands in our area and that we're friends with and whatnot that weren't quite getting the attention they needed. and it quickly grew from that. I mean, we just celebrated our 6th year, and I
Wow.
think we have like 40 something releases at this point, and it's gotten a lot bigger over that time. But the approach that we take to each release and each artist we work with is still kind of that same approach of are looking for the artists that aren't just buzzing off, but the artists that we see as producing music that is just way above the level that, they're getting the attention for. And we try to kind of fit into their mold and see what we can do to help like bridge any gaps that they have in their plans and whatnot. So each release is definitely we don't have a standard, here's what we do for a record or release or anything like that. It's just if we got to play the role of a manager or help out with booking or help out with PR or whatever we need to do, like we'll kind of jump in and fill those shoes as needed to build out a plan for them. And because of that, like it is hard to say. Like I think it's unique in the sense that I know working with a lot of labels, you tend to get like an agreement that is just like, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be XYZ. We don't do that. We always approach every band that we work with as a conversation of what do you need and how could we get you there and stuff like that.
That's
and
very
I think at our
interesting.
size that is kind of unique because I think we take on a little bit more risk than some labels in our size because it isn't, this isn't my day job. This is something that I guess I don't have to survive off of it. So
Sure.
it allows us to take on a little bit more risk with the releases we're doing and like put a little bit more out there for the artists that we work with in hopes of helping them take the next steps.
I think I've been guilty of kind of coming up with a template for how I release a record. Literally a checkboxes of things that I make sure that I'm doing on every release. And that's helpful, but it's also could be a little problematic whenever I like what you said, just sitting down with the artist and asking, what do you need? I think that's a big thing instead of saying, here's how we do things at our label, when some of those may be completely irrelevant.
Yeah. And that's also brought us to not working with artists that, I personally don't feel we could do enough for. Like it might be a music and an album that I'm really loving and connecting to, but when I really sit down and look at what they need, it's not something that we can provide. And, that's just the way it is sometimes. It's nothing against them and it's nothing against us. It's just we're not at that level or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think that's part of it too. Whenever someone submits a demo, obviously you've got to love the music. That's huge. But I have to kind of see a role for myself in their.
Yeah.
When I look at their online presence, I go, I know where I could make a difference here without stepping on their toes or without hurting them or exploiting them. And when I don't see that, whether it's because it's too much work or it's just completely out of my wheelhouse and they need someone better than me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you started out booking shows and tours, is that right?
Yeah.
As a young pup?
So yeah, I am thankful to have 2 older brothers. My oldest brother is 8 years older than me, and he started bringing me out to concerts when I was, 10, 11, 12, going to like old ska and hardcore shows and stuff like really in the Christian music community of like Solid State Records and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love Solid State.
Because growing up in the South, grew up in a very religious household, and so that was definitely my upbringing initially. But from there,
although those records
it just never grew out.
Those records never really looked very religious. They would still scare your parents.
I was actually talking about that with a friend the other day where I'm like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people were just affixing the Christian label at the time because it was a built-in audience. Like if you got signed to Solid State, you had the Solid State audience, whether you wrote Christian lyrics or not. Like,
for sure. Have you listened to the Tooth and Nail podcast, the early episodes?
No.
They talk a lot about that, about how, these bands like Pedro the Lion, for example, and these bands who would be like, we could play to 2,000 people in a church basement. All you had to do is follow these certain rules, and it's like this is the best, it's the best gigs they've ever had. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so your brother's taking you out to these shows.
yeah, so from there it grew, and I mean, I very quickly latched onto music and just realized like this is where I want to be. And so by the time I was like 13, I was in a really crappy like metalcore band, and I was just the front man for that. And like it came time to book some shows, and I was like, well, I can try this. Like, I don't know why. Like, I've always just been on the organizing side of things, and so my brain just went to let me try this. So I reached out to a local venue, Tremont Music Hall, which just shut down a few years ago, and their owner Penny at the time was just like, "Yeah, you could do it, but please bring somebody adult with you," because she understood my age. So it ended up like my mom ended up working the door. We booked like our
Oh my gosh.
my friend's older sister's like fiance's band that was touring through. And then out of nowhere, like literally a few weeks beforehand, I got an email from Relapse Records being like, "Hey, we have a band touring through. Can you add them to your show?" And it was Nile. And I was like,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They ended up backing out, but it was still one of those things where I'm just like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And it just kind of grew from there.
Like you caught the bug.
So I started booking shows when I was
did that first show
booking shows when I was like 13 and just kept going.
With that first show with your mom, did that turn out well? Was there a good turnout? Was the venue happy?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, after the show, I mean, it was a smaller tour, but it was enough. We definitely got enough heads in there to pay the bills and pay the bands and everything. And I remember my mom telling me after the fact that the over pulled her aside and said, "If he ever wants to book again, please just let us know. Like we're happy to work together." Aww. And so I ended up booking at Tremont Music Hall a few more times more than a few, but a bunch of times over the years. And then
as a 13-year-old,
moved up and down.
Oh my gosh. What was I doing at 13? Nothing. Oh man. Good for you.
So yeah, that was, 24 years ago at this point. And it's just over the years, it's just kind of gone, I've tried my hand in everything on the music business side of things because I've just been better at that. I very quickly realized I'm not a musician.
Yeah.
That was my one band and I was done with it after that.
Yeah, I know.
But I loved working with bands and I loved working with musicians.
What does that, going back to the touring and the booking and stuff, what does that teach you about running a label? Because running a label is so often these days sitting behind a computer sending emails, but being on the road and at shows must have provided you with a unique perspective.
At the end of the day, it is still kind of the same thing. It's connecting people, making sure that plans line up, making sure that things are promoted and marketed and all that. There is a lot of overlap.
That's fair.
And then, actually going out and traveling and, driving for 5 hours to catch a band nearby and all that stuff's just like, that's all just part of the networking side of things, which I think even as a record label, you do that all the time now too. We go out to festivals just so we can meet people versus seeing the bands. Like we've probably seen the bands 100 times. And we're excited to see them again, but it's like, we could see them in better, closer places. It's more about connecting with people and having those face-to-face experiences and getting together.
I think, and this is a pre and post-pandemic conversation, but I think that there's the theme of what we've been talking about, or what I certainly feel convicted of is like coming out from behind my desk, coming out from behind social media and connecting with the artists, connecting with the fans, or even connecting with the community who are not yet fans, how important that is and how easy it is to not do that.
Yeah, very much so. That's something that I struggled with for years because I'm very socially reclusive, like just very anxious type person in general. And so for the first few years of running the label, I didn't want to have my name attached to it. I wanted it to shine through with the bands we work with, but it was getting to the point like we would book a yearly birthday party and have our bands come out, and a few of the times the bands are like, "Hey, you should go out and like greet the crowd and say thanks," or something like that. And I was like, that's not me. I can't do that. I think it probably like before the pandemic happened, I started having that realization of this is not sustainable. Like it is, there needs to be more community interaction, like as like a, not just as a business, but as people and whatnot. And I look to other record labels that I think are doing that well. And I am very excited about how they interact with the people that listen to their music and everything. So
that's true.
We've taken a big change on that front and have been focusing more on just being outward and being more
I'm getting
accessible
that sense,
to everyone.
Well, and I think that is really helpful and somewhat essential. I do see, because you were talking about starting off behind the scenes and how that's where you really thrive, and I do see a role where that's I often think of like when you're watching like a late night show and they're thanking their producers and the camera goes backstage and there's this shy guy who does not want to appear on camera, and that's the guy who's like creating the whole show, so there are times where it's like I just want to be in the background. That's where I really thrive.
Yeah. And that is one of the reasons why I'm excited to be able to bring on like more employees and stuff,
Sure.
and more people who are better at that side, because it is one of those things. Like I don't mind it. I love connecting with people, and I've always been the guy who, if bands are playing shows, I will sit behind their merch booth and sell their music or whatever, because I love talking to people. But it's just certain, I don't know, just having eyes on you and just looking at you as like the face of the business or anything like that. That's the side where I've never enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, just don't think about the millions of listeners right now who are listening to this podcast. So give us the backstory on Refresh and how that came to be out of puberty, running shows, coming into puberty at a club.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was that age, I did start booking those shows. Started doing like a little CD distro where I'd set up a table at some shows and everything, and got connected with record labels and buying some things wholesale, and
cool.
Got into street teams and all that stuff. Started getting like early releases and just connecting with more and more people, and was very excited. Like that was so much fun, and I miss street teams so much.
Okay, pause for a second. Let's take a pause. Street teams, yes, unbelievable. A great way to get free crap and not have to do any work for it. But do you think I haven't heard that term street teams in 15 years. Do you think that there is any hope for future street teams, or is it irrelevant because you just need your fans to retweet and repost? But is there any value in street teams?
I do. I think so. I just think it's different. Well, I guess it's really not that different. I mean, the street team was about promoting shows and tours and stuff like that, which I do think is less important now. But it was also about promoting like the record in local stores and getting posters up on polls promoting a record coming out. And I think that side still exists to some degree in some labels. Like, actually, I think if you go to Spartan Records website right now, they have like become a Spartan, and it is a street team.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I think I remember there was one other one like Fearless or somebody like that who still has like some version of a street team, but it is focused more on promoting like physical releases in physical retail locations.
Okay, man, that'd be great to bring.
We actually, we tried to start one years ago, but I mean, at the time, label was too small, and I realized very quickly, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, it is just like promote us online. Okay, that's kind of a weird ask.
Well, you know what? There might be some sort of like in exchange for getting the album like a month early, or maybe getting one free record a quarter, that they could at least post it on your behalf in a subreddit, where there maybe have some cred, or, there could be some ways of doing it.
For sure.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You just triggered me there with street teams. It had been a while. So street teams, go back. Continue with the story of the label.
So being on the street teams, doing those things, it just kind of kept growing and doing other stuff. After high school, I ended up moving up to Pennsylvania, which is actually where I was born. My father took a job up there, so I went with him, and that opened me up to a whole other scene. Like, I ended up moving in. Right before I left, I booked like a small festival here in Charlotte that was like a lot of heavier indie rock, some metalcore, some hardcore, called Bombs and Bruises. That was like 20 bands or so. And one of the headlining bands was a band called N Albatross, which was Northeast Pennsylvania band. And I ended up like connecting with their touring guy and like moving in with him in Pennsylvania. And so the music stuff just kind of kept going up there, and started doing shows in local venues up there and what have you. But eventually I put out a few 7-inches, one for a Connecticut hardcore band called They and the Children. And then one for a local like screamo-ish band called Hands Are, like Hands Are ... And from that, like I loved doing it, and I realized very quickly that I have no idea what I'm doing. And I ran that whole thing into the ground, did it all poorly, forgot to send orders to some people, mixed up orders, lost records, everything you could do wrong as like a 20-year-old. I did. so I stopped. And eventually, like I think by my early 20s, I was honestly feeling a little jaded and burnt out because I felt like I was like running so hard with music stuff, but at a young age where you're extra passionate and extra emotional. I think I just needed to reset, and so I kind of just stopped doing everything. I pulled away and was just like, I'm just going to focus on life and just be a fan. Eventually I moved back to North Carolina, and like the idea of doing another label was always in the back of my head because I did really love it. I needed stability first. So after a few years of like, working full time and saving some money and figuring out how to adult properly, the idea of Refresh came up, and, I guess that was 8 years ago because I registered the business probably about 2 years before we launched it, and was just kind of building up and like connecting with bands and trying to figure out like, how do we want to do this? And so we ended up launching it with like some benefits and stuff, and it's just gone since then.
And why not reboot the old one, or is that the idea behind Refresh?
That was one of the reasons. It's named what it is. That it is the second time around. Other reason being like I'm a software engineer doing a lot of web apps, and so just there's the tie-in with both my day jobs and the fact that it's second time around.
That's great. You say that you don't have a genre, but do you have any sort of guiding light when it comes to finding bands to work with?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is like, do I like this?
Yeah.
Do I think other people will? But no, early on, like I listened to a lot of different things, and I look up to the labels that release a lot of different things. Like I know you've had Joyful Noise on here, and I know I emailed you suggesting them at some point too.
That's right.
But they are one of my favorite labels where I look at their whole catalog of what they've done, and it's all over the place. And I really appreciate that. That was kind of the direction we started with. But over a couple of years, and as I started thinking about the community side of things, I started realizing like you have to get to that point. You can't start at that point. You kind of need to narrow your focus a little bit, in my opinion, because it's hard to build a community around your music if nobody knows what to expect next. So we have kind of narrowed our sound a little bit more into the, indie rock, emo, punk type realm where it's all like interconnected. If you listen to each band, like they're all very different, obviously, but they all run in the same crowds. They all tour together, and it's not abnormal to hear them all play together, even though their sounds aren't quite as connected as maybe early on.
I guess there's just some sort of identity that a label has that you can just identify in the music when you listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just what have I been listening to for the past 20 years, and being excited, especially right now, hearing a lot of the sounds that I grew up on becoming more and more popular again.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm geeking out about. And so that's kind of the direction the label's heading to, is just, let's focus on the stuff that I would be releasing 20 years ago if I was doing this.
That's right. I remember months ago, we were talking about your label. I don't know if this was online or if this was through email, but that your label experienced a bit of a breakthrough with a specific artist, especially on Spotify. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the very first album we put out, which was actually the fourth release we did, was Young Mister, self-titled album, which is songwriter Stephen Fiore, who's North and South Carolina based songwriter who spent some years writing with Universal, like publishing group out in LA, and then moved back home and started making his own music again. And we connected. It was just one of those weird small world things where one of the artists I was working with on a 7-inch, I think the very first 7-inch we put out, was like, hey, you should hear my friend's music. Like it's fantastic. And I meet him and it ends up he's engaged to one of my old high school friends. I'm like, oh, okay. And we connected and chatted more and more. And I just heard his music and I knew like this guy has a sound, like he knows how to write music that is catchy and can be played over and over and just gets in your head. Like it's one of those things where you put it on once and you wake up in the middle of the night and it's just playing in your head. Sure. And so we got chatting more and more and ended up putting out that record with him. And honestly, that was our first real approach to doing a full album. And I never really like expected to jump into the deep end, but it was such a good record that we were just like, we just got to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and kind of like almost do like a face first dive into the water of, hey, we might lose a lot of money trying to figure this thing out, but at least it's going to get us like trying, like understanding PR and radio and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And for 6-9 months or so, like it did kind of flounder. We had a great release of a first single through like Consequence of Sound and got a lot of listens on that, but then it just kind of toppled off. And then out of nowhere, just one random Spotify playlist picked it up, and it was enough to get kind of the algorithms churning and growing over time. And I mean, it's one of those artists where we can still look at it over the last few years and just week after week, he's just picking up more listeners because the more people that hear him are just, more people that are excited. So we've worked together since then, put out a few things together.
Has he done
South by Southwest together and stuff like that?
Has he done other records since then?
Yeah. So he did a EP with I think like a Capitol Records subsidiary of some sort. It was just kind of a one-off thing. And then we put out his last full band album, which is called Sudden Swoon. Okay. And since then, at the start of the pandemic, he started writing a lot more, just being stuck at home with the studio. And so we've done a couple singles since then, and he just put out a new album last year called it's like Here's Where We Are. I think off the top of my head, I'm going blank right now. But
this is where we are now.
It was just this is where we are.
Yeah,
now. That's it.
Yeah.
Self-released that one on his own, just to have a pandemic album that is just kind of focused on.
Oh, that's cool.
The core songwriting, I guess.
So, I mean, whenever a label has a big album like that does so well, and I mean, I can see the record you're referring to. There's very few songs on this album that have under 1 million streams. Some of them 4 million, and so. When something like that happens, it's amazing. But as a cynic, I kind of start to look at the problems with that, and I think I would expect every record moving forward to be as successful. So I'm immediately setting myself up for disappointment. So I mean, and then also like there's so much of that you can't control. I mean, there's just this. It got picked up by an algorithm, but his next record may not, or your next artist may not. And so it's hard to know what do we pat ourselves on the back with, and what was that like after that?
No, that is very fully, that's a real problem. And that was actually something we talked about a lot going into Sudden Swoon, where it was one of those things where we're like, all right, we can put out this record. There's no guarantee that it's going to take off. Like we had seen the EP he had just done with the other label and knew that it didn't have the same like catch that the album did. So it was obviously not like you now have these listeners. It's everything moving forward is going to be the same. So we did go into Sudden Swoon under the idea of, what happens if this is a complete flop? Like, if this thing doesn't get a single play, what's going to happen? And so off of the first record, we kind of just did the math and budgeted, into the second record of, even if we didn't make a dime, we knew we'd be safe in the long run because the first record's doing so well. And so we kind of just took we'll just see what happens approach. I know Steven was very jaded against PR because even with all the plays and everything he's got, 20 million plays at this point, he has yet to get any write-ups from any of the notable outlets like Pitchforks or Stereo Gums or anything like that. And
I get that. Yeah.
When we went into the next record, he was just like, I don't want to waste money on that. I don't want to put, time and effort into.
Oh, good for him.
That's not.
Yeah.
So we didn't. We just did surprise releases of singles and started up a fan club that people could hear early demos and vote on what goes into the record, and made it more of a community driven approach and just really tackled it completely differently. And it was really an experiment. It was just kind of fun of just this could go backfire in our faces, but we're still going to be okay if it does. And it has done well. I mean, we're very happy with it. It's a fantastic album. We released it the fan club version of the LP comes with a bonus record that has 10 extra songs that were not actually included in the album, but they were in the demos that people got to hear and vote on. And that was only available to the people in the club. And it was fun to approach it completely differently. And looking at those successes and then looking at other artists, it's you can't really expect any of those things. We're not at that level where it's just our name on something.
Yeah.
Means it's going to get picked up.
I mean, now you must have artists who new artists to the label who are saying, we want what you did with Young Mister, please. We'll take that one. That's what I would think, right?
Yeah, a few. And I think one of the reasons we don't get it more is because Steven's music is so far outside the realm of what we normally release, because he's more a singer-songwriter and the folkier side of things, whereas we're normally in the indie rock, punk realm and whatnot. And so we don't get it as much as you would think. But even working with other artists, like Downhaul is a good example, where we get a lot of artists who come to us and say, hey, we love what you did with the Downhaul record. We think this would be a great fit for you guys. And I think some of those people do come in expecting the same sort of coverage and what have you. And it's important just to express there's no guarantee. We could put $10,000 into a PR budget. There's no guarantee. It doesn't matter.
And the way that
it is all about the band.
and also luck too, because the way that some of those curators and writers, what they're into this month is not what they're going to be into next month. And we just can't control that. So to you wrote about this record 3 months ago, it's only natural you write about this record. None of us are like that. We all kind of evolve with our tastes.
For sure.
I definitely... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the one thing I always stress to every artist we work with is that the plan we put together is only as good as what the artist is doing themselves. A record label is nothing without the music we work on. If the band isn't going to push themselves hard, then nobody else is going to pick it up. It doesn't matter where you budget things. It doesn't matter any of that stuff if the artist isn't in it, and it isn't active and excited and portraying that to everybody around them. So we do just try to build off of their energy and their plans and make it all about them and not about, PR or radio or whatever we're doing.
I'm starting to get a sense, and tell me if you agree with this, but with respect to Spotify playlists and also respect to the big journalists or the big publications you were just referring to, it seems to me that certain genres or certain types of artists do better in different platforms. For example, on Spotify, I've seemed to notice, and I could just be my own bias or what I'm looking at, that singer-songwriters, this modern-day adult contemporary sound, if you will, folk music, the Bon Iver crowd, there's so much opportunities for it on Spotify. There's traveling playlists and sleeping playlists and yoga playlists and study playlists. I just feel like for a guy like Young Mister, it really does make sense. But then when you hop over to Stereo Gum or some of the more Pitchfork or some of the more evasive platforms, they're looking for something weirder and more intriguing that wouldn't find a home on Spotify. Do you agree with that? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, they're looking for what's happening next, I think.
Sure.
And they're looking at the artists that are kind of taking things a little bit differently versus the artists that did something and did it well. Unless it is a big artist. I mean, if you come out with a new Radiohead record, obviously everybody's going to talk about it. It doesn't matter if it's good or not or anything like that. But when it is like smaller artists that are making a living off of making good, but not necessarily like monumental changes to sounds or whatever. Yeah, I think it can be harder to connect with writers then.
Do you find just one more question about Young Mister on Spotify? Do you find that there is a bit of that snowball effect where anything you release now gets fed to his followers, his predetermined followers, and that the algorithm is more likely to pick them up? Have you noticed that when an artist has success, the second success comes a little bit easier?
I think it's kind of the opposite, weirdly
really
enough. Yeah, like Spotify is very much about how do I word this? It is kind of an echo chamber, I think, in how it promotes music. Sure. It isn't about the artist itself. It is about the individual tracks. And that's why you'll go and you'll see an artist that, put out a song that got 200,000 plays, and then everything else that they put out has 2,000 or 3,000 plays.
Yeah.
And it is because that one got into the echo, and it kept getting promoted, which got it into more playlists and stuff. And we did notice that with Young Mister again, like looking at it literally over the course of the last 5 years of just seeing every week. It's, it's kind of slowly growing up to Friday, and then it tapers off on Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday it jumps back up with the new music not the new music, but the release radar. Yeah. And you kind of see like that step effect of like every week it's just a little bit more, but it's always the same songs. Yes. If you put something else into the algorithm, you'll get the people who do the direct follow and they get the notifications and they get it in release radar, but the new songs aren't immediately just included into that whole cyclical system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, which speaks into the whole concept that like I think something like 80% of what people listen to on Spotify is back catalog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, that's
I mean, they make it easy too. Like at least for me, every time I go on Spotify, the third row of music is, hey, jump back in to this thing that you listen to a lot. We know you love it. Yeah. Play it again. Yeah. I think it really takes a certain type of listener to look at like the release radar catalog and say, I'm going to take a chance on new music this week. Oh, true. I don't think the average person does that. Yeah. I think most people go into what they know and what their friends like and stuff like that. So it is about, making sure that these people become fans of the actual artist and are interested in getting the alert when they drop a new single or whatever.
I've always said, though, and I 100% agree with that, I've always said there's something great about these passive listeners that are funding your other initiatives, that are funding your label and our label to take chances on things that will probably never rack up millions of plays. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Steven, every chance I get of, I don't know if the label would still exist if it wasn't for how well his music has done. And it's allowed us to take chances that we probably wouldn't have been able to take. And I know he's excited about it. Like he's played shows with some of our bands and is now like collaborating with some of the artists and stuff. Like it's been a fun little family that we've grown. Yeah. But it is very much, he's a big part of it.
So listeners, the takeaway here is the first artist you sign has to rack up millions of streams and be your best selling record. It's easy, right? That's the recipe. Just your first release.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's a very slow journey.
You guys have really great visuals, awesome design. You do a lot with merch and social media. It seems like you're a label that understands how important visuals are, especially in an industry where so much is discovered in a browser or on your phone. Is that part of the vision?
Yeah. No, that goes back to, I think it started with website stuff because, again, that's kind of my background. So I wanted to make sure that we always had a professional and clean approach. And, half the record labels out there are using the same platforms for their sites. So wanted to make sure that if you go to our site, it didn't look exactly like everybody else's, even though we're backed by the same platforms. So that was important. Working with local artists, making sure that, everything we design is from an artist that we love. I think of all of our merch, I've done one design. Everything else has been just
that's great
local artists that we love. And
there's this,
now that was one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, there's this element of your label that comes across to me through your visuals. It's like everything just looks fun. It's the illustrations, the posters, the label ads, the mystery bundles. Things just look fun. Like it's from your web perspective, your bounce rate's probably low just because people want to stick around and look at some of these cool visuals.
Yeah. I think early on, I felt like things were a little too sterile on our site. And so when we went to approach a redesign, I was looking at other labels I love and kind of realizing all right, I need to make this more interesting and more interactive and stuff. We've always had that approach with visual designs, like t-shirts and merch and stuff like that. Whenever we book shows, we've always had that approach, but it was online. Some of our ads and stuff could have been a little too stiff and too professional looking before. And so when we brought on an art director a few months ago, that was kind of a big focus for me. Is my art style is always that kind of sterile style. And I still do some. I do a lot of layouts with a lot of our artists to help them transition their music into full album packaging and stuff. But I wanted to make sure that we picked up an artist who is complete polar opposite of what I do, so that we could kind of work off of each other of, coming up with ideas that are more interesting and more inviting. And Kayla's been fantastic at that. And I love working with her.
Well, that's a very mature, evolved of you, because I would do the opposite. I would hire someone who it would just agree with everything I want. But that's, I think that's really smart.
I'm very much about bringing on, anytime I work with anybody in any scenario, it's always a place where I'm I want them to know more than me. Plain and simple. If I could do it myself, then there's no point in bringing on somebody unless it's just a time thing. But I want them to come in and have a different approach and challenge the ideas and what have you.
I was going through your site today. I want to give a pro tip for our listeners at home here. If you go to Refresh Records on Twitter, which is @RefreshRecs, you have pinned a tweet to the top of your profile, which contains all of your primary links like Bandcamp, YouTube, Instagram, Discord, email addresses. I think this is genius, and it'll rarely go out of date. And that Twitter bio section, I don't know if this is you or somebody else on your team, but the Twitter bio section doesn't give you much space to work with. So very cool. I think people should go check that out. That's genius to me. I love that.
Yeah, that was actually an idea I stole from another label that I love. That we've done some releases with.
Well, that's what this whole show is about. Just steal
Records.
Oh.
Yeah. I saw Chill Wave Records did that, and we had done Cliff Diver record together last year, and we're friends with them and chat a lot about music. And I saw them post it. I was like, "That's brilliant! That's such a simple idea.
So simple.
Yeah. I want to do that too."
yeah, I know. That's so simple. Can you explain Private Stash? I saw this recently, and again in my research. Can you explain that to us? What is that?
Yeah. And just to make sure, I'm not breaking up, right?
No.
Okay, cool. You started to a little bit, so I
Oh,
want to
I'm
make sure it
sorry.
wasn't
No,
reciprocated.
it sounds good over here. Do you want me to ask the question again?
Sure. Yeah, might as well.
Okay, so I'm asking you about private stash. It's something that you're doing with test pressings. I'm very curious about if you could explain that to us.
Yeah, so the private stash, and I regret naming it that because I realized after we started making the marketing for it that I directly stole that name from another label too. And
I thought you were going to say
to.
I thought you were going to say it was something dirty. Okay, interesting. Okay.
Oh no.
Okay.
But I mean, I see a lot of labels doing this in general. But the actual name private stash, I didn't mean to copy it. It was obviously just in my head. But whenever we're doing records, especially a variant that's going to sell out quick, I always make sure that we hold a couple extra ones because you never know what happens with shipping or if something gets damaged or lost or whatever. I want to make sure that we can still cover those people. Same goes with like t-shirts, since when we do a lot of business to business agreement with the local print shop where we provide them the shirts and they print them. So there can be a certain amount of, errors in printing. So we always make sure that we print at least one extra of the popular sizes. So even if it's a limited shirt that we're only selling, 30 of or whatever, we might do 35 just to be safe.
Sure.
So over the years, I mean, I've always had this idea of, we'll just keep those and we'll give them away or do something. And we've done that a lot. We've done a lot of giveaways, and we've every now and again, we'll sell some test pressings for some reason, whether it's raising money for a benefit or what have you. But when it came up to this last year, we were celebrating our 6th birthday, and every week we were doing different deals and having a different focus for each week of like this week, records are 30 to 50% off, and next week it's t-shirts and stuff like that. For the last 2 days, I was like, I decided that we're going to just open up the private stash of some of these releases we've been sitting on for years, and we might only have like 2 copies left of a certain variant, or we might have some test pressings that, after we gave them out to bands, we had a few left over. And so we ended up just putting them all on the website at what I believe is reasonable pricing, and just offered them up not for free. Offered them up to anybody who was interested in that stuff. And just called it the private stash because that's literally what it was. It's the stuff that we stored away to, for a rainy day, for whether that's giveaways or promoting or what have you.
Well, that's pretty cool that like something that obviously creates scarcity, but it's something cool because I've seen it before with records that I've been a fan of, and I didn't become a fan of the album until long after the vinyl was sold out or the cassette was sold out. And I've seen that happen before, and I'm like scrambling to grab my wallet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've hit that. And I know also I've had a scenario where I ordered one of those records that sold out quickly, and then mine got lost in shipment. And when I hit up the label, they were like, well, sorry, we don't have any. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't you hold any?
Wow, yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that we prevented that scenario.
For sure.
Which has already happened. I literally, we had a downhaul record that just showed back up to us. I mean, I shipped those a month and a half ago, and this past week it just showed up at my door. And it was one that we had no more copies of. So when we got it back, I hit up the customer and was like, hey, your record actually just showed up. Well, let me ship it back to you.
Oh, man.
And so I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
That was just a mishap where I forgot to put aside the private stash on that one.
That's crazy. What were you guys doing with test pressings? Have you been doing anything with your test pressings?
As far as in regard to the private stash or in general?
Just in general.
Sorry,
I mean, a lot of labels just give them to the bands or just throw them out or put them on file. But I'm starting to see people be a little bit more creative from a retail standpoint with test pressings. Have you guys been doing that at all?
Right. Yeah. So we obviously do, like, we'll get the test pressings and we'll, keep one copy for the label and give copies to the band and stuff like that. In the past, we used to actually just do 10 copies, but we got away from that because it's a hassle. But
yeah.
We visually, since all these pressings are coming from different plants, and we wanted to have more of a consistent vibe with them, so we ended up just doing chipboard jackets for both the 7 inches and 12 inches, and getting a rubber stamp that says Refresh Records test pressing in a circle, and like
that's right,
stamping it with with like artist and title and catalog, and then hand number of 1 out of 5 or whatever.
That's genius.
That way, every test press has a similar look, but it's also unique and interesting, and is something more fun to look at than just this boring white jacket with a label from the plant.
That is really, I think that's really smart. Have customers been responding to that?
Yeah, we started doing the design first with Hit Like a Girl. We did a live record for them, and I think there was like a lathe cut record where we only did like 30 records. So I kind of got the stamps for that initially, which just say artist title, catalog number, and then I got a separate one that had the test pressing stuff, so I could do them in different colors and make it more interesting. But yeah, people have been liking it. I definitely normally if you sell a test pressing, it just goes into somebody's collection, but I have been getting tagged on posts where I think people are more excited because it's not as boring to look at.
So at what stage in the album release process do you do that? Like, when would you release those? And then how much would you charge for that compared to, say, the actual vinyl when it's pressed?
I usually, with test pressings, I try not to sell them until like a year later. Because we do find other uses for them. Like we'll do giveaways. Earlier this year, literally all of our releases were delayed. So on every single vinyl release, we just had a giveaway where we drew one pre-order and they got a free test press. And so this is, and that's why it goes into the private stash of some of these records. We don't have enough test press to sell them.
Right.
But I usually start, like, if we sell them a year down the line, I'll start at like a $30 or $35 price.
Okay.
Which isn't, 50% more than retail or whatever. Yeah. And then if it doesn't sell, then maybe another year down the line, if we sell it again, we'll just mark it down to 20 or 25 or whatever. And it just kind of goes on from there.
You have to pay for them. I think they're pretty steep price anyway, $10 or $20.
Yeah, they're more pricey than the records themselves.
Yeah, so exactly.
That's why we stopped doing the 10 of them. I was like, I'll just get whatever we get.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing labels who are doing something crazy with them. I sold one of my test pressings. I had it maybe 7 months, maybe 6 months before the album came out, and I sold it for. I think I sold it for $100, which was a little bit. That included free shipping, which was a little bit like, I don't know what the word is, but I was a little ashamed of selling it for $100. But my thinking was, you're going to get it shipped to you 6 months before anyone even knows the song titles or album title or album cover.
Yeah.
I thought there was something exclusive to that. And so I sold one and we shipped it to Japan. It was cool. But I don't know if I do that again, but I think there are some creative things you can do with test pressings.
Yeah. Yeah, and I look at like Top Shelf Records is really interesting, does like weird hand artwork, like painting them and doing stamps and just collage art, and I love that.
Yeah.
I wish I had the energy for that. Or not the energy, the creativity for that. Like Kevin is he is a wild creative person.
That's a great label.
But then I also see like Counterintuitive Records. I'm pretty sure they do like a screen printing or maybe like a spray painted stencil that is it's still the white jacket, but the artwork that they spray paint on the test pressings is pretty much the artwork of the album, but like in a really stripped down DIY screen printed type of look. And I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah,
and I've seen that a lot over the years of like people screen printing separate covers for test pressings.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much for doing this. If you can, I want you to stick around for a second. I have something else I want to ask you for our Patreons and a little trivia game if you're down. But thank you so much for chatting. It's been a blast to talk with you.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's been great.
And thank you all for listening. If you want to hear the extended portion of this interview, as well as our little trivia game that we play with Josh, please go to otherrecordlabels.com/Patreon. That's spelled Patreon. Thank you so much for being a listener.